Hello, community, and welcome back to another Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Anita Polite Wilson, C-suite trusted advisor, elite team strategist, and board director, helping folks reframe hot topic conversations from difficult to different. And I am so extremely excited to have two very dear friends with me, Jason Eisner and Neil Pretty, the co-founders of Aristotle Performance. Welcome to the program, fellas.
Thank you, Dr. Anita. Happy to be here.
So happy to have you. I have to give our audience a little bit of background history. So a few years ago, I was made aware of this certification called the Psychological Safety Index certification through the Fearless organization. It was really based on the book by Dr. Edmondson. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But right away, when I met these two, there was just something about the way they showed up on the webinar. There was something about the way they drew everyone into the conversation. There must have been about 30 people going through the certification. And since then, not only have I used the tool regularly with my clients, but we have regular touch points. And every time we get together, there's this sense of community that I feel with them that I certainly hope you feel here. So with that little bit of background, next Tuesday, they are kicking off their first annual Psychological Safety Day, and I'm excited to be part of the lineup as a moderator and as a speaker. So, gentlemen, tell us how this came about.
Psych Safety Day. Well, I think, funny that you bring up kind of how we met, because that was pretty early on in the journey for Neil and myself. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we've been certifying people, training leaders, working with teams for about we're coming up on 5 years, right, Neil?
Yeah.
And so a few years ago, we had this idea. It was like, we should do an event, right? How do we bring people together around this topic? Because like you, when we first got into it, it felt very niche. It felt very like on the outskirts. And then as you get into it, you find there's more and more people around the world that are also focused on this, that are doing good work, that are thinking about things differently. And so this was really, how do we bring all of that together in one place on one day? And once Amy Edmondson agreed to speak, it was like, okay, we have an event. And then who are the other global thought leaders? Who are the people that are doing interesting things, yourself included? And that was kind of the start of Psych Safety Day.
So this is your first. What are your expectations for this first one, Neil? And how are we going to get there together on that day?
Well, I think one of the biggest expectations that we have is connected to sort of where we come from when it comes to psychological safety. It comes from a place of curiosity. It comes from a place of wanting to have everybody win. So, we aren't really worried about us making the most amount of money possible. Those kinds of things, we're like looking at the bigger picture. So what feeds into that is what we learn over time. So, the people who are the speakers, like yourself, like a gentleman from the University of Toronto, they come from all these different sources that feed into our practice. And that's really how it's come together, and what we want to share with everyone else who joins, with all the participants, is that psychological safety is this sort of common human experience that we all have. And so much of our lives is impacted by how we assess our environment. And there's a lot of different views on how we navigate that, how we approach it, how we assess it. So, that's what we're trying to accomplish, is really giving people our perspective. And that's what we find most often is the most challenging is, we've invested our lives at this point, into this work. We want to share that with everyone else. So how I see that coming together is bringing those voices into one space and inviting others to observe and participate with them.
I definitely get where you're coming from when you say you've invested your life in this work. When I think about the work that I do in the diversity, inclusion, belonging space, I can recall back even as far as 20 years coming across an article, and every now and then I still find it. There was this young man looking to select his college, and he said he made his decision based on the fact that he felt like he belonged. And that word has been trending most recently in the last couple of years, but it's kind of always been there. Are you noticing the same with psychological safety? It's something that we've had a pulse on, but we're really understanding what it is and running with it in the more recent years.
Take it away.
Okay, yeah. So the way I like to answer that is, psychological safety is something that we start exploring as soon as we start interacting with other people. Mm-hmm. It's so ingrained in us that we forget that it's a thing that we even assess, and that's one of our biggest challenges. And then the question of why now comes up immediately. And the answer really is because the nature of our work has changed. Now, that's really the answer. And the reality is, if organizations want to do better, they can't do what they've always done and sort of treat people as though they're numbers. And I think there's a demand now to not be treated or made to feel like you're a number, like you're a cog in a machine. Nobody wants to feel that way. And there's an expectation and there's enough mobility that people can move along if that sort of promise isn't fulfilled on. So that's why it's relevant. If you don't create these environments, organizations suffer, people suffer. If you don't invest your energy into, we say psychological safety is built in drops and lost in buckets, but it's an investment, and we put our time and energy into creating these environments and things work out better. So yeah, we're seeing psychological safety trending. We've been on that trend for several years. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the most important things that people understand, that it's not a new thing. It's an old thing that has new importance.
I like the way you put that. It's not a new thing. It's an old thing that has new importance. And I think for those who don't have the background that the three of us have, psychological safety on the face of it might seem like it's this big, complicated thing, but it's really not. And when you use the word assess, it kind of reminded me of the 4 aspects of the psychological safety index for organizations, which is a willingness to have open conversations, attitude towards risk and failure, willingness to help, and diversity, in that order. So when we think about those 4 components of psychological safety in the workplace, why does it seem like it's a mystery still to folks, especially when you mention the fact that the minute we start to engage with someone, psychological safety is at play, even though we may not know what it looks, acts, feels, or sounds like to be able to call it what it is?
I think for starters, and Amy Edmondson has said this before, it's like bad naming. It's like right off the bat, when you hear psychological safety, we know the word psychological, we know safety, so we put it together, but the actual definition is different than what you might expect. I think where I've gotten to now is I'm thinking about it as telling the truth in real time. Right? And the truth can come in various forms. It could be, I don't know something, or I have this idea, I'm not sure if it's good. It could be, challenging someone, right? And it's like, how quickly to real time does that happen? Does it happen an hour after the meeting? Does it happen 6 months down the road when you've been holding in resentment? And so it's really just about telling the truth in real time, which is a hard thing to do. It sounds easy, it's hard to do, because you have to know the truth, you have to put it into words, and you have to do it quickly. And so I think that just gets conditioned out of us, like you spend your life in school, you're told you have to raise your hand in order to speak, right? At home, children should be seen and not heard. There's so many things that condition us out of this. So I think that's a lot of the challenge.
That's a strong statement, telling the truth in real time. And what it makes me think of is sometimes we fail to deliver a message that is received because we're focused on being right. And when you make that declaration, telling the truth in real time, that can be kind of heavy for some folks. And so one of the techniques that I share with people is, if you're struggling to find the words, it's okay to say to someone up front, I have something that I want to say, and my intention is this. I'm struggling with the words, and if the impact isn't quite right, let's work through that too. So how do we manage all of that and still tell the truth in real time without getting ourselves in trouble?
Yeah, I think that is the truth, right?
Yeah.
That is just telling the truth at that moment. I was just talking to someone who was speaking at a conference with 6,000 people online, 2,000 people in the audience. And he said his first words were, my palms are sweating, my legs are shaking. Like he was just telling the truth. And it was like this instant connection, right?
Mhm.
Everyone tuned in because he's just telling the truth. So yeah, I think it can be simple like that. But I like your example where you're just kind of, yeah, it is hard to find the words sometimes, but that is the truth in the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's easier to tell the truth in real time when we're willing to be transparent, authentic, and a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, and to build on what Jason said and your example, I think one of the things that we're often asked is like, is it possible to have sort of complete psychological safety? 100%, right? What does that look like? And the reality is that there's sort of no end that is completely psychologically safe, where there's no question in your mind ever that what you're saying is going to be received well. What we're doing is putting a flag out there, which is what we should always be aiming for. And the closer to real-time reality that we can get in more situations, and the more we invest in that environment that creates that goal and then allows people to strive towards it, the better we're doing. And because psychological safety is the kind of thing that can break down so easily, what we need to be good at is continuously reinvesting and re-upping our efforts that build psychological safety. And when things break down, working to repair it. So it's like, we don't just get there and it's done. It's not like reaching the top of Everest. It's like, it's a flag that we'll always be kind of pursuing.
I think you just said something that's really key. And when things break down, it's not if, but when, because we're all human and we're all susceptible to saying something that sounds right up here until it translates right here. And then we realize, wait, that's not what I meant to say. And that can be considered a failure for some folks. So in thinking about how we can prepare the community for next week's Psychological Safety Day, I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Edmonds' new book, The Right Kind of Wrong, which is a more tightly packed read. I got through the Fearless organization in no time, and I don't know if it was because of the excitement of the certification and the new community that I had just joined, if it was the two of you, if it was a combination of everything. But this newest book, The Right Kind of Wrong, is a much more tightly packed read. So my question for both of you is, what sneak peek insights can you share from the book that's particularly resonating with you as individuals, and then what's resonating with you and your clients? Because I know you've been working on this for a while.
Go for it, Jason.
Agreed. A denser read. But I would say the biggest takeaway, the thing that stuck with me the most, is like how you design experiments or pilots, right? Because we work with a lot of different organizations, and before they're gonna, train across the entire organization, we start with a pilot. And there's this idea from the book, Right Kind of Wrong, where a pilot should fail, right? A properly designed pilot should have points of failure because we're trying to adjust. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did you just say? And Neil's like, yeah, he said a pilot should fail.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I thought the whole purpose of a pilot, at least the way I've been trained, was a pilot is it's kind of like your hypothesis. You want to prove that it's right. And if it should fail, that's a good thing too. But I think I heard you say a pilot should fail.
Should fail. It should be designed so that it has points of failure, because what is the real goal of the pilot? It's to refine something to the point where it can scale. Yeah, and every pilot we've done, which we've fallen into this trap, you try to design it so that it works. Okay, let's only invite the people that are interested, the high performers, let's get the data that makes us look good because we want that approval. But that could end up being the worst thing to happen, right? You could design it to succeed, but then when it actually scales, that's where it fails. Yeah. So your pilot should have failures so that you can adjust them, so that the thing that you actually scale is a refined, better version.
Wow. I don't know about anybody else in the community, but you just broke a piece of my brain. And I absolutely get what you're saying. But traditionally, two things keep coming to mind. A pilot is like supposed to prove that what you plan to do is going to work before you put it out there. And then we're expecting failure, which is something that people don't like. I know I myself
Right.
do not like failure. And even after all of these years of helping people to understand, trust the process, I'm still getting used to that F word.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about how we should be reframing this.
So I'll kind of jump on this and just build off of what Jason said already a little bit, because fundamentally your capacity to learn is correlated with your capacity to be wrong.
Yes.
So if you're testing a hypothesis, the goal of testing a hypothesis is not to test if it's right, it's to test the edges. Mm-hmm. And it is this idea that we fundamentally, we find ourselves having to challenge. Yeah. And I think that's where people get stuck, is they want to sound smart, they want to be experts, but good experts don't use their expertise to sound smart. They use their expertise to synthesize information and ask better questions.
True.
So if you're doing a pilot or you're doing something like that, what are the questions you want to have answered? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they're all things that you can sort of, what can we break? What norm are we attached to that's actually, like Jason says, where can we be intentional instead of habitual? So what are the norms that we want to break down? One of the organizations that we work with is notorious for having an unbelievable amount of meetings for one decision that takes up an unbelievable amount of people.
Yep.
And if they were to just trim that down to the organization that we work with that has the next lowest or the next highest amount of meetings per decision, they would improve productivity by probably 30 to 40%.
Wow.
So it's when we test a hypothesis, we have to break the norms that are attached to it. And we have to use our, this idea in practice. And I think that's one of the things that came out of the book is this isn't just theory. You have to put it into practice. And that's why a person, for me, what I got out of the book was an individual's capacity to be wrong and face that and design around it, face that F word, face failure, and be okay with it, develop comfort with it. Mm-hmm. That's where we can see real change.
I would guess that this organization has so many meetings because they're so busy collecting data, checking data, and rechecking data so that they're not failing, which kind of misses the point of the right way to be wrong. And community, this is a good place to pause this conversation while my brain readjusts to the whole point of a pilot being intended to fail. But I want you to come back and join us next week, because we're going to be talking about how we can get through Thanksgiving after the elections and how we can make sure that we're doing our best to provide a psychologically safe space so that if it's not enjoyable, at least it's tolerable. And I want to specifically come back to two statements that our guests have said: telling the truth in real time and testing the edges. So we're going to talk about that the next time we come back. In the meantime, if this podcast helped you to reframe hot topic conversations from difficult to different, please share this with your network and add your own comment. In the meantime, please get in the flow with me. Follow, like, and overshare any podcast that helps you reframe hot topic conversations from difficult to different. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.